At first, I started as a person who I think was confident in writing, and then, or not confident in writing, but thought I could write a little bit. And then in the middle, I thought I couldn't write anything. But by the end of it, I came out kind of thinking about words more deeply than I ever thought possible before. And each decision I made when writing became more acute, and it changed more so the way I thought, I think, than the way I wrote, and vice versa. I guess the way you write is also the way you think. So came out as a better writer and as a better thinker. There's a sound in Times Square, in the middle of Times Square, that has been emanating beneath the subway grate since 1977. A sound artist, Max Newhouse, put it there. And it's kind of this fascinating thing because when you walk over it, if you didn't know about it, you'd probably not hear it. Maybe you would. But when you do know about it, you can't take yourself away from that moment. So while you're standing above these subway grates and this sound like whoom, 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 whoom is emanating upward, it could be anything. It could be the subway itself. But it's not. And you're standing there looking out, and there's the Mickey Mouse wandering around, all these tourists, and so I got into strictly that sound that came out of it and wrote about 50 pages on, I guess, what I thought about that sound and the history of sound art as well. After the program, I didn't necessarily keep writing about it. But because I'd invested so much time in such a particular thing, and well, namely listening to things, it definitely changed the way I perceive, like life in total. It changed the way, sitting around, even like talking to people at a party or whatever, how I'm like listening to different things at all times, or if I'm in a gallery, while I'm looking at like a silent painting, what else is actually going on there. And then in terms of writing, yeah, because I knew it's a difficult thing to write about sound, right? Because it's abstract, it has no visuals. So, and when you write with metaphors, and to avoid writing with metaphors when writing about something that's like, this strange thing, it's a real challenge. So it changed the way I once again adapted my thoughts to words, I guess, and to my interactions with my environment, art or other. Big thing that I did with 3 other graduates of the program was we started an online magazine. It's called the Forgettery, forgettery.org. And that was like, just getting that going, it had nothing to do with writing. It had, something to do with sort of willpower and the desire to have people write about art or write about culture or really anything they want, write poetry, etc. So that was a big thing. That took about, I guess that's a 2-year process, and now like it's sort of up and running, and that's like a cool thing that we've done. I've also worked for a while with a photographer, editing his photographs and archiving all these old photographs of celebrities and artists, and writing introductions to those edited books, and then just writing in my own time as much as possible, and trying to write more fiction, which I think, interestingly enough, the writing program here affected the way I write, make-believe stuff. It made me more aware of what a sentence is and what you can do with a short sentence rather than a long sentence, or vice versa. To study in a program about writing, you're learning so much about, it's like, so you go to school to become a plumber or whatever. You're definitely a plumber, and it's integral to who you are. But to go to a program about writing, it's, when we speak or whatever, when we write something down, we can't separate ourselves at all from what is coming out of our mouths. And to be in a program where, and like that's huge, and to be in a program where the professors were just as much teachers as they were writers themselves, and they prided themselves in teaching just as much as they did in writing, if not more so in teaching sometimes. It became like writing is a way of life. It's a thing that that's how you live. So in terms of how it changed my work or my writing, I think it made me become more of a writer. It made me become a person that is inseparable from being a writer. And the things that I read here and learned here sort of shifted my mind in a way that, you know, otherwise wouldn't have been possible. But to pinpoint exactly what I mean by it, that's a difficult thing. I'd have to sit down and write it. To begin with, like what I learned in reading about art criticism and in doing it myself was how we as people are sort of nothing without the objects around us. If the world had nothing in it, then we would have nothing that could define us. And maybe that goes back and forth. And to be able to speak about an object, whether it's art or something else, is a way of putting something in the world at rest, sort of. It's a way of contemplating it, obviously. And I begin to realize that more and more when reading like literature or whatever. If a person can describe a room and the things in the room, then they can describe a world. And in order to describe it, though, you have to sort of understand it and understand it for yourself. And I think that that's what criticism is. It's a personal understanding, and it's a personal understanding that can be sent out to the world for other people to contemplate and to pass on. And if we don't do that, if we don't pass on stories, then we have nothing left. I would recommend this program to someone who's interested in writing about art. Without the program, I wouldn't be able to look at art the way I look at it now, and more specifically, to write about it is, I mean, it's a challenge, and sometimes a horrific challenge to like sit down and really, you know, delve into something you're looking at and how it affects you and how it might affect other people and how it could affect the world. But in a way, this program both complicates that process, and in complicating it somehow makes you okay with the complication that's, I guess, hidden within that process. When I was an undergrad, I studied studio art and English, and I heard about this program. I was living in Berlin, Germany at the time, and working like various jobs and traveling and things. I would sit around at night and do some drawings, and during the day when I had time, I'd look at art, and I would always try to do some writing. And so when I learned about this program, and I actually learned about it from a professor in my undergrad program who just suggested or mentioned it to me in passing. So I looked into it, and I figured that it was sort of the best way of combining the two things that I really like, or, you know, I guess a multiplicity of things: looking at art, making art, writing, not necessarily writing about art, but thinking about art. So I applied, and actually applied late, and spoke to Levi directly on the phone, and from there, yeah, I flew back to the US and started the program. The amount of dedication that teachers brought to their work was just a huge influence on me, and something that I guess I couldn't have expected because I didn't have it so much in the past, not from so many of the teachers that I worked with in the past. But also just the strange things that we ended up reading that I obviously otherwise would have had no idea existed. Strange is like a vague word, but like a wonderful kind of strange, like just offering things to my brain that otherwise, I just wouldn't have stumbled on, and offering different thoughts on the world that I otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to even consider before, because each teacher brings in something from their past, either as students themselves or something that they've been working on for years or decades, and something that's influenced their thought. It's all kind of packed into a pretty intense 2-year program. In Levi's course, he has you read a lot of wonderful and strange things about medieval thought processes and the way that people looked at the world then, and Giordano Bruno is one of them, and then a contemporary writer, Agamben, writes about those ideas as well. And to read those things, it really affected me because it was a way of getting into the mindset of a whole different, century of people, or just a whole different mindset altogether about what it would be like to view the world through different eyes, and more sort of specifically with the medieval thought process on how the world, how perception is linked to all forms of perception is linked to the stars and to one's hand, and that's where clairvoyance and things like that comes from, and the cyclical sort of interaction and interconnectedness between the way one looks at a work of art or hears music, or even how someone makes love, for instance. That's something that strongly affected me. Well, for one, it's the magazine I had mentioned, the Forgettery, where wrote a couple things there. One was, and this was a little while ago, obviously, but on Kanye West's new album, and that was sort of a fun thing to get into, and the history of hip hop, and then it sort of went into race relations in America. That was like a long, funny, not funny, it wasn't funny, but interesting, I guess, thing to write. Also written recently, there was a show about Hurricane Sandy that actually the Brooklyn Rail put on, and I went there and did some writing about a couple of the artists that were there. A lot of alumni from this program actually were involved in that. I've tutored some students, some other writing students, some actually from this program, so kind of keeping it in the family, I guess. And that's been, it's an interesting process. It's been kind of a wonderful one to work with other students who are reading the same things I read a year or 2 years ago, and hearing their thoughts on it, because some of these people are from obviously different countries, and they get a whole different thing. And even if they didn't come from a different country, you get a whole different thing. Soon after we graduated, where I guess you always have the freedom to write about whatever you want, but you just don't have the freedom to publish it anywhere. And we obviously, like anyone, wanted to do that. And so we got together and discussed sort of what our vision was, which actually isn't, we still don't really have a totally concrete vision, I don't think. And the process involves, sort of unfortunately, a lot more business work than it was, pleasure writing. Not that writing is always pleasurable, but work. But we fundraised for a while. We did a Kickstarter campaign, and we reached out to all sorts of people that we sort of knew or didn't know at all, and we raised a good chunk of change. And from that, we had the money it took to build a website, and what is so much more important to us, to pay our writers, which is not always easy to get paid as a writer. I think it takes a long time to do that. So that was like a really great thing. But yeah, there were difficulties, obviously, difficulties working with other people who have similar interests, very different interests, and what our total group goal was something that was also sort of problematic. But we worked through it all, and what's really exciting about it all is it's there. We have writing online, and we're, I think, getting a bigger audience, and hopefully getting more writers that can write their own way about topics, about culture, or about art. And yeah, without the program, it's definitely shaped by the program, without a doubt.